All right, so in this episode, I just want to talk through the macro extension tube. Last week, I actually uploaded a video with the reversing ring and just running through how the reversing ring works and the limitations that it has. I should note at the beginning that the macro extension tube falls victim to a lot of the same challenges that the reversing ring does, where you lose your ability to autofocus and you end up with a fairly narrow depth of field in many cases, depending on the lens you pair it with. But it is another affordable option, and this one here I think cost me around 500 Rand. I'm not sure what they go for at the moment, but I know that there are both these affordable versions, and then there's the slightly more expensive ones that come with a autofocus feature, so it retains autofocus. This is actually still electronic, whereas this one's just to hold the lens. And to be honest, I feel like if you can get one with an autofocus at like under $1,500, that's really good. I would go ahead with that. But after that, it's almost worth just paying a little bit more, saving up and getting a dedicated macro lens instead of, fiddling about with these more affordable budget methods. These are really for those who are strapped on cash and who don't want to invest big going in initially. So if I take this apart to just show you how it's comprised, there's this piece here, which is the part that the lens attaches into, and then there's a varying amount. Each different model might have different amounts of be removed and added to make it shorter or taller. So for instance, say I wanted to reduce the magnification, I could remove one of these, attach this to the number 3, and now I'd have this distance instead of the added distance of those together. So that's something to keep in mind. It gives you some versatility, and you're going to need to adjust these depending on what lens you're pairing it with. So I was actually starting out this tutorial trying to show you what it would look like on the 10 to 20 mil, but it does not work. It's too close, and I'll show you shortly in a video. I'll cut to it, and it will show how or where the problems lie when it comes to using this on some wide-angle lenses. But next to it here, I've got a more traditional lens, and this is more likely what you've got in your kit if you've just started, or you've got a camera lying around that you got gifted or something. It's the 18 to 55 mil. It's Canon's go-to. I don't have the Nikon equivalent here, but if you're a Nikon user, there's always similar models out there. All that really matters is the zoom range, essentially. So 18 to 35 to 55, this area towards the low end here is not ideal. So this is when you start to have issues with getting too close to your subject and you start casting shadows from your camera body. But if you typically go to somewhere between 35 and 55, I would recommend starting out, and I'll show you what these different values look like in an actual demonstration, what the nug looks like at these different varying magnifications. So I've got the macro extension tube on, I've got the 18 to 55 millimeter Canon lens on, and I'm at the highest focal length that the lens does, which is 55 millimeters. And at 55 millimeters, take note of the sort of magnification that we're getting in terms of this image. I'm just going to move the subject around a little bit so you can see. But that is what you're getting at 55 mils. So you'll see what happens now is as I change the focal length, I'm going sort of the wider, I'm moving towards the wider side, going from 55 down to 18. And I'm going to keep it above 18 because 18 actually, it's so wide that you can't fit the subject in focus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it down to about 30 mils, which is about where I'd recommend starting. And you'll see now the image is out of focus. I'm just going to bring the subject closer. And you notice how the magnification has become increased as we go wider with the lens. I can go a little bit lower as well. And again, as I move it wider, I can move the subject closer and keep it in focus. And yeah, this is essentially how you're going to have control over the magnification that you've got. It doesn't work with prime lenses. So if you've got a 20 mil lens or a 50mm lens that's a prime, it doesn't zoom, you're not really going to get that versatility. Whereas with these 18 to 55s and stuff, it lets you play around and get different magnifications. Yeah, so essentially, all you need to do is attach your kit lens, and I just need to line them up here. You attach your kit lens to the extension tube, and then the extension tube fits into your camera body, the same way a lens would. And it locks in there. So this is a nice light lens, so it's not causing any issues, but sometimes when the lenses are heavier, you can actually end up with a little bit of a gap here that forms between the mount and the lens. And that typically comes from low quality extension tubes or just a worn one. And over time this does happen and they do need to be replaced. But I mean, I've had this one for about 15 years now, I think, and it's only now starting to really give me that problem. And that's only with heavier lenses. So I've got my camera set up here with the 18 to 55mm on the macro extension tubes, and I've just got a nug in front of it. And I just want to show you one of the challenges that you encounter when shooting this method. And it's the same with the reversing ring. So you'll see that my settings are currently ISO 200 and a shutter speed of 0.8. So that means it's 0.8 of a second. If I drop it down, now it's at 1. So that's 1 second of exposure that it's set to. I've just got to make sure that my thing's set to a timer. Yes, okay. But you'll see that you don't see anything through the rear viewfinder. And I'll show you why this is a problem. So if I were to take a picture here, just give it a few seconds here, it's on a countdown. But what I'm going to show you is that what I'm seeing on the viewfinder is not representative of what I'm going to get out of my exposure. You see that? So even though it was completely black, and I mean, it's out of focus there for that reason, but you can see that lighting wise, there was a lot more light coming through than the viewfinder let me know. And the reason why this becomes a challenge is if I just keep increasing my exposure so that I can see what's going on, my exposure becomes really high. And if I were to take a photo now, it would just end up being blown out. So the one way to take photos in this method is to use your viewfinder to set the aperture high, or to set your your shutter speed high, long, or your ISO up, either one, and then to position your image so that you start your shot then in terms of visual composition. And then when you're ready to take the photo, you have to drop it back down to whatever you think is correct. And it's going to take a little bit of trial and error and getting used to it. For my lighting situations, and every lighting situation is going to be different, but for mine, I think I typically end up requiring around 1/4 of a second. So if I were to take another photo now, it should be a little bit closer to what I would expect in terms of a correct exposure. Again, I haven't really spent time lining these up. What I'll do is I'll take some photos after this using this exact same tube and show you. But there you can see that's looking much better in terms of exposure. And again, when I look through the viewfinder, there's nothing. So that is a little bit of a challenge. Another method that you can use and that I sometimes use, which is a little bit of a hack. So you'll see that when the flash is down, again, I see nothing on the screen because my shutter speed is too slow. But you'll see what happens if I pop my flash up. Suddenly I get an accurate representation of what I'm actually seeing there. So a little hack that I use, or I guess a little DIY to make it so that it's a bit easier, is the following. What I do is, once I pop the flash up, I'll take a piece of paper like this and just put it in front of the flash at a little bit of a distance, just so any light that gets sent from the flash gets pushed up and back instead of towards the subject. So by doing this, and you can always put it on something to hold it, I don't recommend putting stuff up right against the flash or over it, as you might see some smoke pop out, and yeah, it's actually quite an experience sometimes depending on what you put there. But what I'll do is I'll just place this in front. So I'll just show you exactly what it does in practice quick. So here's how it plays out in an average real world scenario. I've got my nug down there. I want to take a photo. I turn the camera on. I turn the viewfinder on. I don't see anything there. I know my shutter speed's correct already. So what I do is I pop the flash. The viewfinder comes to life. I then do my focus adjustments and I begin the process of taking the photo. So I put it on a timer. I usually use a 10-second timer, sometimes a 2-second, but 10 seconds typically best. And as it counts down, I'm preparing my paper. And I'm just going to place it in front here, rebound the light so that it doesn't impact the nug at all. And you can see there that what one's actually getting out of the image is the same amount of light as without the flash. But it lets you just give that, or rather lets you get that viewfinder image going so you can actually make your focus adjustments. And then when we look at the image that I took, you'll see that there's a very narrow depth of field in the sense that one area will have trichomes that are mostly in focus. And set yourself realistic expectations when using these macro extension tubes. You're not going to get the same clarity as you would from a dedicated macro lens, but it can typically do a decent job, especially early on in your journey. But I'll show you what this looks like when we do some stacking, and I'm going to run through stacking in another video because it's a whole topic on itself. But essentially, when you use these macro lenses or even these macro extension tubes and stuff, it becomes more challenging to handle depth of field, and there are ways to do it, and I'll just quickly show you how to retain your depth of field when using one of these extension tubes, because I do think it is an important part of the process that I actually didn't configure initially. And let's see if we can improve this image quality that I got in this last shot by adjusting the aperture. So to improve the depth of field on the image, you've got to do the following when using these macro extension tubes. You've got to remove your lens and the extension tubes from your body. Place the lens back as though you're shooting normally with it. And now what I want to do is I first want to make sure that I've got the correct aperture. So I'm at f14, that's where I want to be. So I rotate the lens across here and keep an eye on the center of the lens, the very center. You see that? That's changing the aperture of the lens. So what I want to do is I want to hold it down so that the aperture is smaller. I want to hold down this right button as well next to the lens that releases the lens, and I want to hold down both and turn. So what I'm doing is I'm removing the lens from the camera body while retaining its aperture. And now I can attach it back to my extension tube and then back to my camera body. And with this done, let's take a look at how the image that I took earlier would differ with a higher aperture. So we need to keep in mind first that because we've increased the aperture, the amount of shutter speed that we're going to need for the shot is going to be higher than the last time. So I'm just going to change 0.4 to around 2 seconds, and let's see how it goes. So let's do the same thing. Let's pop open this flash, get the piece of paper, start the shot. And let's see how this comes out. And there we have it. You can see that even just by looking at it here, the image has a lot more depth to it. You get a lot more focus in terms of how much of the nug you actually see in focus. With the other one, you only got a few trichomes. This one, there's a little bit more. You're still going to require stacking, but this is a good way to at least reduce the amount of stacking that you need and the amount of images that you need in a stack. And that's pretty much all there is for these macro extension tubes that I can think off the bat. If you have any questions, or if you buy one and you're unsure how to use it or anything like that, feel free to comment. I'll try to help you out. But I'm going to take a few shots with this exact setup here, merge them together in a stack, and just show you what's possible as well, so you can get a better idea of what can happen when we do stack these images.